The encounter that changed everything. Manhattan buzzed with its usual frenetic energy, a metropolis humming with ambition and untold stories. Among the towering skyscrapers and bustling crowds, Christian Bellamy, a 36-year-old billionaire tech mogul, strode down the street with purpose. His life, meticulously crafted through grit and innovation, was the epitome of success. With his tailored suit and polished demeanor, Christian was an untouchable force, admired and envied by many. Yet beneath the surface, he harbored an emptiness he could not name, a void he had long dismissed as the price of ambition. This day began like any other. Christian had just wrapped up a morning meeting in his luxury office suite. His schedule, packed as always, left little room for deviation. But something about the crisp autumn air lured him out for a walk rather than opting for his usual private car. As he strolled along the sidewalk, his mind wandered to the high-stakes merger he was orchestrating, a deal that would secure his empire's dominance for decades. He turned a corner and stopped in his tracks. Across the street, a young woman struggled to keep up with 4 children darting around her like fireflies. The sight, though unremarkable to most, froze Christian in place. It wasn't their chaotic energy that caught his attention, it was their faces. They were his. The children's features mirrored his own so perfectly, it was as though he were staring at living portraits of himself. Wide brown eyes, a distinctive sharp jawline, and even the same unruly curl that refused to stay tamed in their hair. Christian's breath caught, his mind reeling in disbelief. Was it a trick of the light? A bizarre coincidence? He blinked, but the illusion persisted. Christian, a man accustomed to controlling every variable in his life, felt his heart race in a way no boardroom negotiation ever had. He stepped off the curb, weaving through traffic with uncharacteristic recklessness. His path led him directly to the woman, whose startled gaze met his as she tightened her protective stance around the children. "Who are you?" Christian demanded, his tone low but charged with urgency. "Why do they look like me?" The woman, though clearly rattled, held her ground. "My name is Jamie Edwards," she said, her voice steady despite the tumult in her eyes. "And these are my children." Christian's gaze flicked to the children huddled close to her, their curious eyes darting between him and their mother. "That's not what I'm asking," he pressed. "They look exactly like me. This isn't some random resemblance. What's going on?" Jamie hesitated, her posture rigid as if bracing for impact. Finally, she sighed, the weight of her next words evident in her expression. "Years ago," she began, "you made a donation at a fertility clinic. I used that donation." The ground beneath Christian seemed to shift. He staggered back a step, her words striking him with the force of an avalanche. A donation. A choice he had made in his 20s, a fleeting decision made on a whim, had resurfaced in the most unimaginable way. "You're saying I'm their father?" His voice cracked, the words foreign and unwelcome on his tongue. Jamie nodded, her jaw tightening. "Biologically, yes." Christian stared at her, his world unraveling with each passing second. The weight of what she was saying sank in slowly, like a ship taking on water. He couldn't look away from the children, their innocent faces a constant reminder of the past he had long since forgotten. A past he thought would never come back to haunt him. Without another word, Christian turned and walked away, leaving Jamie standing there. The world he had so carefully constructed felt precariously fragile, as though it might collapse at any moment. The image of those children burned into his mind. He wandered aimlessly, the bustling city around him reduced to a blur. That evening, Christian sat in his penthouse, gazing out over the Manhattan skyline. The city's lights sparkled like a sea of stars, but their usual allure was lost on him. His mind replayed the encounter in an endless loop, each detail sharpening with every iteration. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward those children, nor the unsettling realization that a part of him had existed out in the world, completely unknown to him. Why now? Why had this revelation chosen today to upend his life? He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in his glass as he struggled to process the implications. Christian Bellamy, a man who prided himself on being untouchable, felt vulnerable for the first time in years. The following morning, Christian made a decision that surprised even himself. He needed answers. He needed to see Jamie and the children again, not just to satisfy his curiosity, but to confront the unease gnawing at his soul. He tasked his assistant with finding Jamie's address, a request that drew a raised eyebrow, but no further questions. Later that day, he found himself standing before a modest brownstone in Queens. It was a far cry from the polished glass towers of Manhattan that he called home, yet it exuded a warmth that his sterile penthouse lacked. As he knocked on the door, he felt a rare flicker of apprehension. Jamie answered, her expression wary but not surprised. "You found me," she said simply. Christian nodded, his throat dry. "We need to talk." She hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. The living room was small but inviting, filled with signs of a life that revolved around family. Toys were scattered across the floor, and framed drawings adorned the walls. Christian couldn't help but notice how different this space felt from his own. Lived in, chaotic, alive. The children peeked out from the kitchen, their giggles silenced as they spotted him. For a moment, Christian felt like an interloper, an uninvited guest in their world. Jamie gestured for him to sit, crossing her arms as she leaned against the doorway. "So, talk," she said, her tone guarded. Christian took a deep breath. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Jamie's eyes hardened. "Tell you what? That I had children using a donor from a clinic. Why would I? You made it clear when you donated that you didn't want any involvement." Her words stung, though he knew they were true. "But they're mine," he said, his voice faltering. "Don't I have a right to know?" Jamie shook her head, her expression a mix of frustration and defiance. "All right. You gave that up when you made the choice to donate anonymously. I didn't ask for you to show up and disrupt our lives." Christian felt the sting of her words but couldn't shake the pull he felt toward the children. "I don't want to disrupt anything," he said. I need to understand." Jamie studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Fine," she said. "But this isn't just about you. It's about them. Don't forget that." As Christian left her home that evening, he felt no closer to answers, but something had shifted. The children's faces haunted him, their laughter echoing in his mind long after he had returned to his penthouse. For the first time in his life, Christian Bellamy felt the weight of responsibility. A responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for, but couldn't ignore. Little did he know, his journey was only just beginning. A step into the unknown. Christian Bellamy's week spiraled into unfamiliar territory after that fateful encounter with Jamie and the 4 children who bore his face. The usually unshakable tycoon found himself pacing in his sprawling penthouse, a glass of untouched scotch on the table beside him. Every so often, he'd glance out at the Manhattan skyline, his refuge in moments of uncertainty. This time, the glittering city lights offered no answers. The revelation had opened a door to a past he hadn't realized would ever resurface, and the reality of it loomed larger with each passing day. He couldn't get their faces out of his head, not just the children's uncanny resemblance to him, but the life they embodied, a life that felt so different from his own. Their innocence, their laughter, the warmth that permeated Jamie's small home, it all stood in stark contrast to the calculated sterility of his existence. For the first time in his meticulously planned life, Christian realized he was at a loss. He spent the next few days consumed by the thought of them. Meetings and calls blurred into a fog of half-hearted attention as he grappled with the strange pull he felt toward this newfound family. He wasn't a sentimental man, but something about those children had reached into a part of him he'd long since buried. And Jamie, there was something about her strength, her determination, that lingered in his mind. She had built a life, a family, without him, and that fact simultaneously intrigued and unsettled him. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, Christian made a decision. He cleared his calendar for the weekend, a move that shocked his assistant, and called Jamie. Her voice on the other end of the line was cautious but not unkind. "What do you want, Christian?" she asked, her tone measured. "I'd like to see them," he said, his voice steady. "The kids. I want to understand what kind of people they are, and what kind of people they've made me." There was a long silence before Jamie sighed. "Fine, but it'll be on my terms." Saturday morning found Christian standing outside a small park in Queens, dressed down in jeans and a sweater, a far cry from his usual tailored suits. It felt strange to him, almost like slipping into a persona he wasn't quite sure how to embody. He scanned the park for Jamie and the kids, his nerves mounting in a way he hadn't expected. When he finally spotted them, his breath caught. The children were chasing each other across a patch of grass, their laughter ringing through the crisp autumn air. Jamie sat on a bench nearby, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable as she watched them. For a moment, Christian hesitated, unsure of how to approach. But then one of the children, Thomas, he thought, spotted him. "Hey, it's him," the boy called out, his voice full of excitement. The other three turned, their faces lighting up with recognition. Before Christian could react, the children swarmed him, their enthusiasm both overwhelming and strangely endearing. They bombarded him with questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. "Are you really our dad? Why do you look like me? Do you know how to play soccer? Can you buy us ice cream?" Christian chuckled, a genuine smile breaking across his face for the first time in what felt like years. He crouched to their level, answering their questions as best he could. Yes, he was their biological father. No, he didn't know how to play soccer, but he'd like to learn. And yes, he could buy them ice cream, lots of it. Jamie approached them cautiously, her arms still crossed. "They're excited now," she said, her tone tinged with both amusement and skepticism. "But don't think that means this is going to be easy." Christian met her gaze, his expression earnest. "I don't expect it to be easy. I just want to try." The day unfolded in a way Christian could never have anticipated. He played soccer with the kids, or at least attempted to, much to their amusement, and marveled at their boundless energy. Each child was unique, with their own quirks and personalities. Thomas, the eldest, was a natural leader, always looking out for his siblings. Clara was quiet and observant, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Lucas, the joker, kept the group laughing with his endless antics, while Mia, the youngest, had an uncanny ability to ask the most profound questions with innocent sincerity. As the afternoon wore on, Christian found himself feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Joy. Real, unfiltered joy. It wasn't the fleeting satisfaction of closing a deal or the hollow thrill of acquiring another luxury. It was deeper, rooted in the simple act of being present with these children, who, against all odds, were a part of him. Jamie watched from a distance, her expression softening as the hours passed. She still had her reservations, Christian could see that, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was relief. Whatever it was, it gave him the courage to keep going. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the park began to empty, Christian sat with Jamie on the bench while the kids played nearby. The air between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts. "They like you," Jamie said finally, breaking the silence. Christian nodded. "I like them too." Jamie turned to him, her expression serious. "But liking them isn't enough, Christian. They need stability. They need to know they can count on you." "I understand," he said, his voice steady, "and I want to give them that." Jamie studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for any sign of insincerity. "We'll see," she said at last. Christian nodded, a flicker of determination igniting in his chest. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was fighting for something that truly mattered. As he watched the children chasing fireflies in the fading light, he realized he wasn't just stepping into their world, they were stepping into his. And together, they were embarking on a journey neither of them could have foreseen. Bridges built on fragile foundations. Christian Bellamy arrived home from the park that evening with a mixture of emotions whirling inside him. Exhaustion tugged at his body, but his mind was alight with memories of the day. The children's laughter, their boundless energy, and the way they had so easily pulled him into their world. For a man whose life was defined by control and precision, the chaos of the park had been a revelation. But as he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, overlooking the city that symbolized his empire, doubts began to creep in. He wasn't a father, not really. He didn't know the first thing about raising children, let alone 4 of them. What did he have to offer them besides his wealth? And even that felt hollow in the face of their innocence and trust. The following morning, Christian made a decision that startled even him. He would spend the next few weeks integrating himself into the children's lives, proving not only to Jamie but also to himself that he could be more than the sum of his past decisions. His assistant, Chloe, raised an eyebrow when he announced he'd be clearing parts of his schedule for personal matters, but she didn't press further. The Christian Bellamy she knew rarely deviated from his routines, and this uncharacteristic shift intrigued her. The first step. That week, Christian called Jamie and proposed something that took her by surprise. A family outing. It wasn't a grand gesture, no luxury yachts or private jets, but something simple and unassuming. He wanted to take the children to a science center, a place where they could explore and learn. Jamie hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. She wasn't sure if Christian truly understood what he was committing to. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "I've never been more sure about anything," Christian replied. Reluctantly, Jamie agreed, and on Saturday morning, Christian found himself standing outside their modest brownstone, a bag of snacks slung over his shoulder. The children erupted from the house like a swarm of bees, their excitement palpable. "Are we really going to a science center?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Yes," Christian said, smiling, "and I expect you to teach me everything you learn." The children cheered, and for the first time, Jamie allowed herself a small smile as she watched them pile into Christian's sleek SUV. She climbed into the passenger seat, her arms crossed as she regarded him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "This isn't just about impressing them, is it?" she asked, her tone cutting through the chatter of the kids in the backseat. Christian glanced at her, his expression earnest. "No," he said. "It's about earning their trust. And yours." A day of discovery. The Science Center was bustling with families, and Christian found himself uncharacteristically nervous as they stepped inside. He was used to commanding boardrooms, not navigating the chaos of interactive exhibits and excited children. But as the day unfolded, he discovered a surprising joy in seeing the world through the children's eyes. Thomas gravitated toward the robotics exhibit, his fascination evident as he peppered the staff with questions. Clara, quiet but observant, lingered in the astronomy section, her small hands tracing the models of distant planets. Lucas, true to form, found endless amusement in the optical illusions, dragging Christian from one display to another with uncontainable energy. And Mia, the youngest, clung to Christian's hand as they explored the butterfly pavilion, her wide-eyed wonder tugging at his heart. Jamie watched from a distance, her skepticism slowly giving way to something softer. Christian's awkward attempts to engage with the children were endearing, and she couldn't help but notice how quickly they had warmed to him. For a man who seemed so out of his element, he was doing surprisingly well. As the day drew to a close, the children were reluctant to leave. They begged for one more exhibit, one more turn at the interactive displays. But Jamie finally put her foot down. "It's getting late," she said firmly. "We need to head home." Christian knelt down to their level, his expression serious but kind. "I promise we'll do this again," he said. "And next time, you can pick where we go." The children cheered, their faces lighting up with joy. Jamie watched the interaction with a strange mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Cracks in the ice. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jamie found herself sitting on the porch with Christian, the cool autumn air wrapping around them. It was the first time they had been alone since the park, and the tension between them was palpable. "You did well today," Jamie said finally, her tone reluctant but sincere. Christian glanced at her, surprised. "Thank you. But this isn't just about showing up once or twice," she continued, her voice firm. "They need consistency, stability. They need to know you're not going to disappear the moment things get hard." "I understand," Christian said, his voice steady. "And I'm not going anywhere." Jamie studied him, her gaze piercing. "Why now?" she asked. "Why do you care so much all of a sudden?" Christian hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because I've spent my entire life chasing things that don't matter," he said finally. "Money, power, success. They're all empty. But this feels real. And I don't want to lose it." Jamie's expression softened, but her guard remained firmly in place. "Actions speak louder than words," she said. "If you're serious about this, you'll prove it." The weight of the past. The following week brought unexpected challenges. Christian juggled his responsibilities at work with his newfound commitment to the children, and the strain was evident. He showed up for parent-teacher meetings, helped with bedtime routines, and even attempted to cook dinner one evening, a disaster that left the kitchen covered in flour and the children in fits of laughter. But despite his efforts, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was out of his depth. Jamie's cautious demeanor only added to his uncertainty. She was polite but distant, her trust still elusive. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jamie confronted him. "You're trying," she said, her tone even. "I can see that. But I need to know if this is just a phase for you. I can't let the kids get attached to someone who might walk away." Christian met her gaze, his expression resolute. "I'm not walking away," he said. "Not now. Not ever." Jamie studied him for a long moment before nodding. "We'll see," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. As Christian left that night, he couldn't shake the weight of her words. He knew earning her trust, and the trust of the children, would be the hardest challenge he had ever faced. But for the first time in his life, Christian Bellamy felt like he was fighting for something that truly mattered. And he was determined not to let them down. Shadows of doubt and glimmers of hope. As the weeks turned into months, Christian Bellamy settled into a rhythm he'd never imagined for himself. His world, once defined by luxury boardrooms and high-stakes deals, now revolved around family dinners, bedtime stories, and soccer games in the park. It was a life far removed from the one he had built for himself, a life both exhausting and exhilarating. Yet, beneath the surface, doubts lingered. Jamie's cautious demeanor and the weight of his past decisions haunted him. For every step forward, there seemed to be a shadow of hesitation in her eyes, a reminder that trust was a fragile thing, and he hadn't fully earned it. A day of reckoning. One evening, after a long day of work and an impromptu trip to the children's school for a science fair, Christian found himself alone with Jamie in her cozy kitchen. The children had gone to bed, their laughter and energy now replaced by the soft hum of the refrigerator. Jamie stood by the counter, her arms crossed as she watched him brew a pot of coffee. "You're good with them," she said finally, her tone neutral but not unkind. Christian glanced at her, surprised. "Thank you. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to trust you completely," she added, her gaze steady. "You've been here, you've shown up, but that doesn't erase the fact that you didn't know about them for years." Christian sighed, leaning against the counter as he faced her. "I can't change the past, Jamie. I can only show you, every day, that I'm here for them, and for you." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as though weighing his words. "And what happens when this gets hard? When the novelty wears off? Are you going to disappear back into your world of skyscrapers and private jets?" Christian shook his head. "This isn't a novelty for me," he said firmly. "I know I've made mistakes, more than I can count, but I'm not the man I was then. I'm here because I want to be, not because I feel obligated." Jamie didn't respond immediately, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't fully ease. "We'll see," she said softly, echoing the words she'd spoken weeks ago. The call that changed everything. The following morning, Christian's resolve was put to the test. He was in his Manhattan office, poring over financial reports, when his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Amelia Mendez. Amelia had been a fleeting figure in his life, a whirlwind of glamour and ambition who had never been more than a convenient companion. They had parted ways months ago, but her reappearance now felt like an omen. "What do you want, Amelia?" Christian asked, his tone sharp as he answered the call. "I thought you'd want to know," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I've been hearing things, rumors about you, and that little family you've taken in. People are starting to wonder, why would a man like you waste his time on a woman like her?" Christian's jaw tightened, his grip on the phone hardening. "Stay out of my life, Amelia." "Oh, I intend to," she replied, her tone icy. "But don't think for a second that everyone else will. You've got an empire to protect, Christian, and people love a scandal." She hung up before he could respond, leaving Christian staring at the phone in disbelief. The conversation rattled him more than he cared to admit. Amelia's words were a reminder of the precarious balance he was trying to maintain, the tightrope walk between his public life and the private one he was building with Jamie and the children. Trust under siege. That evening, Christian arrived at Jamie's house with a heavy heart. He found her sitting on the porch, a cup of tea cradled in her hands as she watched the sunset. The children's laughter echoed faintly from inside, a sound that usually brought him comfort. Tonight, it only deepened his unease. Jamie glanced up as he approached, her expression immediately shifting to concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her cup down. Christian hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "I got a call today," he said finally. "From someone I used to know. She made some comments about us." Jamie's eyes narrowed. "What kind of comments?" Christian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She implied that people are talking, that my involvement with you and the kids is raising questions." Jamie's expression hardened, her protective instincts flaring. "Questions from who?" "Your corporate world. The tabloids." "Both, probably," Christian admitted. "But I don't care about any of that. I just wanted you to know, in case something comes of it." Jamie crossed her arms, her gaze piercing. "And what happens if it does? If your world comes crashing into ours and the kids get caught in the crossfire?" Christian met her gaze, his voice steady. "Then I'll protect you. All of you." Jamie didn't respond immediately, her expression a mix of anger and uncertainty. Finally, she nodded, though her shoulders remained tense. "You'd better mean that," she said quietly. A test of resolve. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Christian threw himself into his time with the children, determined to shield them from any potential fallout. He took them to the park, helped with their homework, and even attempted to bake cookies with Mia, an endeavor that ended with flour covering half the kitchen, but left them both laughing. But Jamie remained distant, her wariness a constant reminder of the fragile ground they stood on. One evening, as they sat together after the children had gone to bed, she finally voiced the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Why are you doing this, Christian?" she asked, her tone quiet but firm. "Is it guilt, obligation, or is it something else?" Christian hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's because I want to be a part of their lives," he said finally. "And yours. I've spent so much of my life chasing things that don't matter. But this feels real." Jamie studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for any sign of deception. Finally, she sighed, her expression softening slightly. Actions speak louder than words, she said. If you're serious about this, you'll keep proving it. The storm breaks. Christian's resolve was tested once more when a tabloid article surfaced, painting Jamie as a gold digger who had trapped him with the children. The story was filled with lies and half-truths, clearly orchestrated by someone with a vendetta, likely Amelia. The fallout was immediate. Jamie was devastated, her private life thrust into the spotlight in the most humiliating way. Christian acted swiftly, issuing a public statement condemning the article and threatening legal action against the publication. The story was retracted within days, but the damage had already been done. One evening, as Christian arrived at Jamie's house, he found her sitting on the porch, her eyes red from crying. "Why did you let this happen?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you protect us?" Christian's heart ached at her words. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I should have done more." Jamie looked at him, her expression a mix of anger and pain. "This isn't just about me, Christian. It's about the kids. They don't deserve this." "I know," he said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. But I can't do it alone. I need you to trust me." Jamie hesitated, her emotions warring within her. Finally, she nodded, though her eyes remained wary. "This is your last chance," she said quietly. Christian nodded, determination hardening in his chest. He knew he had a long road ahead, but he wasn't about to give up. For the first time in his life, he was fighting for something worth having. And he wasn't going to let them down. Rising from the rubble. The days following the tabloid debacle were some of the most challenging of Christian Bellamy's life. For a man who had once thrived in high-pressure environments, this was a different kind of storm, a deeply personal one that struck at the foundation of the fragile trust he had been building with Jamie and the children. The headlines may have faded, but the damage lingered, a shadow that loomed over their every interaction. Jamie, who had already been cautious, became more guarded than ever. The children, blissfully unaware of the full extent of the situation, noticed the tension between the adults but couldn't understand its source. Christian found himself walking a tightrope, determined to prove that he wasn't the man the tabloids painted him to be, but unsure how to bridge the growing divide between him and Jamie. A gesture of redemption. Christian's first step was to take decisive action. He called a meeting with his public relations team and instructed them to draft a formal statement not just condemning the article, but highlighting the values he now wanted to represent. He made it clear that his personal life was not to be treated as fodder for public consumption, and that any further intrusion into Jamie's or the children's lives would result in aggressive legal repercussions. But Christian knew that public statements and legal threats weren't enough. Jamie needed to see something real, something that went beyond words or grand gestures. And so, he decided to take a more personal approach. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Christian sat with Jamie in her living room. She was quiet, her expression unreadable as she sipped a cup of tea. The air between them was heavy, the unspoken tension threatening to suffocate them both. "I want to show you something," Christian said, his voice quiet but steady. Jamie raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "What is it?" Christian pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed it to her. Inside were documents detailing a trust fund he had set up for the children. The money wasn't ostentatious, just enough to ensure their education and future needs were secure. Alongside it was a letter, handwritten by Christian, explaining why he had taken this step. Jamie read the letter in silence, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a mixture of surprise and emotion. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Christian said simply. "I don't want them to ever feel like they have to rely on me, or anyone else. I want them to have options, to pursue whatever they want in life without worrying about money. And I want you to know that I'm not just here for now. I'm here for the long haul." Jamie's gaze softened, though her guard didn't fully drop. "It's a good start," she said, her tone cautious, "but actions speak louder than words." Christian nodded. I understand, and I'll keep proving it. A glimmer of hope. Over the next few weeks, Christian doubled down on his efforts to integrate himself into the family's daily life. He attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with homework, and even began volunteering at the children's school, much to their delight. He found himself learning things he had never considered before: how to make Mia's favorite pancakes, how to decipher Clara's artistic but illegible handwriting, and how to encourage Lucas's wild energy without letting it spiral into chaos. Thomas, the eldest, remained the most skeptical. At 12, he was old enough to remember the years before Christian's arrival, the times when it had been just him, Jamie, and his siblings against the world. He watched Christian with a wary eye, testing him in small but deliberate ways. One evening, as Christian helped Thomas with a science project, the boy finally voiced his doubts. "Why are you doing all this?" he asked, his tone blunt. "You didn't even know about us before." Christian paused, taken aback by the question. He set down the glue gun he had been using and turned to face Thomas. "You're right," Christian said. "I didn't know about you. And that's my fault. But now that I do, I want to make up for lost time. I want to be here for you and your sisters, no matter what." Thomas studied him for a long moment before nodding, though his expression remained guarded. "Okay," he said quietly, "but don't mess it up." The turning point. Despite Christian's progress with the children, his relationship with Jamie remained fraught. They were civil, even friendly at times, but the wall she had built around herself was still firmly in place. Christian understood her caution. She had built a life for herself and the children without him, and the thought of letting someone in, only to risk being hurt, was a daunting one. One rainy evening, as they sat together on the porch, Christian decided to address the elephant in the room. "I know you don't trust me completely," he said, his voice calm but earnest. "And I don't blame you. But I want to know, what can I do to change that?" Jamie looked at him, her expression weary but thoughtful. "It's not about what you can do," she said. "It's about who you are. Trust isn't something you can earn overnight, Christian. It's built over time, through consistency and honesty." Christian nodded, absorbing her words. "Then I'll keep showing you," he said, "for as long as it takes." Jamie's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "We'll see," she said, echoing the words she had spoken to him so many times before. The storm returns. Just as things seemed to be stabilizing, another challenge arose, this time from within Christian's own company. A board member, sensing an opportunity to exploit Christian's newfound vulnerabilities, leaked a rumor to the press suggesting that Christian's involvement with Jamie and the children was a publicity stunt designed to soften his image. The story gained traction quickly, and Christian found himself at the center of yet another media frenzy. Jamie was furious, her trust in him shaken once more. "I thought you said you'd protect us," she said, her voice trembling with anger as she confronted him in her living room. "How could you let this happen again?" Christian's heart ached at her words. "I didn't know this was coming," he said. "But I'll fix it. I promise." Jamie shook her head, her eyes filled with hurt. Promises don't mean much when you can't keep them. Determined to make things right, Christian held a press conference the next day, publicly denouncing the rumors and reaffirming his commitment to Jamie and the children. He also announced his decision to take a temporary step back from his company to focus on his family, a move that shocked both the business world and Jamie. When he arrived at Jamie's house that evening, she was waiting for him on the porch. Her expression was unreadable as she handed him a cup of tea. "That was a bold move," she said, her tone neutral. Christian shrugged. It was the right move. Jamie studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Maybe," she said, "but actions speak louder than words." Christian smiled, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. He knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time, he felt like he was making real progress, and he was determined not to let anything, or anyone, stand in his way. The journey home. The weeks following Christian Bellamy's press conference marked a turning point. His decision to step back from his company sent ripples through the business world. But for Christian, the real stakes were not in boardrooms or stock markets. They were in the warm, chaotic household in Queens, where trust was slowly being rebuilt, where laughter filled the air, and where the possibility of family, a real, messy, beautiful family, was beginning to take root. But the road was far from smooth. Jamie's walls, though softening, still stood firm. The children, while increasingly attached to him, had moments of doubt, moments when Christian's sudden presence in their lives felt fragile and temporary. And Christian himself, for all his determination, grappled with the weight of his new reality, a reality that demanded more from him than he had ever given to anyone. A day at the cabin. One brisk autumn morning, Christian had an idea. He approached Jamie with a proposal that surprised her. "There's a place upstate," he said, his tone hopeful. "A cabin my grandmother used to take me to when I was a kid. It's nothing fancy, but it's quiet, and the kids might enjoy it. I thought, maybe we could all go for a weekend." Jamie hesitated, her skepticism evident. "Why?" "Because I'd want us to spend time together," Christian said. "Away from the city, away from the noise. Just us." Jamie studied him for a moment, her arms crossed. "And what's the catch?" "There's no catch," Christian replied. "I just want a chance to show you, and the kids, that I'm serious about this, about us." Jamie sighed, her gaze softening slightly. "All right," she said. "But if this turns into some over-the-top billionaire retreat, I'm out." Christian smiled, relief washing over him. "You have my word." The unexpected retreat. The cabin was nestled in a quiet forest clearing, its rustic charm a stark contrast to the gleaming opulence of Christian's penthouse. The children, who had spent most of their lives in the city, were wide-eyed with wonder as they explored the woods, their laughter echoing through the trees. Thomas took charge, leading his siblings on a nature expedition, while Christian and Jamie unpacked supplies. The air between them was still tinged with caution, but there was a growing ease, a sense that, for the first time, they were on the same page. That evening, as the family gathered around a fire pit, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, Christian felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The children's faces glowed in the firelight, their eyes bright with excitement as they shared tales of their woodland adventures. Jamie sat beside him, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "You're good with them," she said quietly, her voice almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire. Christian glanced at her, surprised. "Thank you." Jamie hesitated, her gaze fixed on the flames. "I've been waiting for you to prove me wrong," she admitted. "To show me that this is just a phase, that you'll disappear the moment things get hard. But you haven't." Christian's chest tightened at her words. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm. "I promise." Jamie looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Finally, she nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at her lips. "We'll see." Bonds forged in fire. The weekend passed in a blur of laughter, exploration, and quiet moments that felt more profound than anything Christian had experienced in years. He taught the children how to build a fire, a skill he hadn't used since his own childhood, and marveled at their boundless curiosity and determination. Thomas, who had always been the most skeptical of Christian's intentions, began to warm to him in subtle ways. A lingering question about the stars, a hesitant smile during a game of cards. Clara, the quiet observer, surprised him with her insights, pointing out things he hadn't noticed about the forest or the way the fire burned. Lucas, ever the prankster, kept Christian on his toes with his endless antics, while Mia, the youngest, clung to him with a trust that felt both humbling and terrifying. Jamie watched it all with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She wanted to believe in Christian's transformation, to trust that he was here to stay, but years of hardship had taught her to be cautious. Still, as she saw the way the children lit up around him, how he had seamlessly integrated into their world, she found herself daring to hope. A test of strength. The tranquility of the weekend was shattered on the final day when an unexpected storm rolled in. The once clear sky darkened, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The cabin, though sturdy, wasn't immune to the elements, and the power flickered before going out entirely. Panic rippled through the children, their excitement giving way to fear. Jamie worked to calm them, her voice steady but strained, while Christian sprang into action, lighting candles and gathering blankets to keep them warm. "We'll be fine," he assured them, his tone calm and confident. "It's just a little storm. We'll make it an adventure." His words seemed to have an immediate effect, and the children gradually relaxed. Together, they built a makeshift fort in the living room, using blankets and pillows to create a cozy refuge from the storm. They told stories by candlelight, their laughter gradually returning as the storm raged outside. Later, as the children drifted off to sleep, Jamie approached Christian, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for keeping them calm, for being here." Christian met her gaze, his own filled with determination. "I meant what I said," he replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Jamie nodded, her walls finally beginning to crumble. "Maybe," she said softly, "you really are." The journey home. When the storm finally passed, the family packed up and began the journey back to Queens. The children chattered excitedly about their weekend, their voices filling the car with a warmth that made Christian's heart ache in the best possible way. As they neared Jamie's house, she turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way," she said, "but trust isn't something that happens overnight. You'll need to keep showing up every day." Christian nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I will," he said, "for you, for them." Jamie's lips twitched into a smile of her own, and for the first time, Christian felt like he was truly home, not in a penthouse or a skyscraper, but in the messy, unpredictable, beautiful chaos of family. As the car pulled into the driveway, the children tumbled out, their laughter echoing in the crisp evening air. Christian watched them, his heart full, and knew that this was only the beginning of a journey he was more than ready to take, and for the first time in his life, he felt whole. A new foundation. As Christian watched the children race up the driveway and into the house, their laughter still ringing in his ears, he felt an unfamiliar sensation, a sense of belonging. It was fragile, tenuous, but it was real. For so long, he had lived in a world defined by transactions and achievements, where relationships were merely stepping stones or distractions. But here, with Jamie and the kids, he had found something far more valuable. A purpose. Jamie lingered by the car, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. She didn't speak immediately, and Christian could sense she was turning something over in her mind. Finally, she broke the silence. "You've done a lot to prove yourself," she said, her tone measured. "But I need to know this isn't just a phase, that you're not going to wake up one day and decide this life isn't for you." Christian stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Jamie," he said softly, "this isn't a phase. It's not a distraction or an escape. It's my life now. You, the kids, you're my life. And I'll spend every day proving that to you." Jamie searched his face, her eyes flickering with doubt, but also with something else. "Hope. I want to believe you," she said. "But I've learned the hard way that promises aren't always kept." "Then don't take my word for it," Christian said. "Let me show you, one day at a time." A long overdue conversation. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jamie invited Christian to stay for tea. They sat together in the living room, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. For the first time since their initial meeting, the conversation felt easy, natural. They talked about the children, their quirks and talents, and even shared a few laughs about Lucas's never-ending pranks. Then, Jamie shifted in her seat, her expression growing serious. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," she said. "Why did you donate at that clinic all those years ago? Was it just a whim?" Christian hesitated, the question taking him off guard. He stared into his tea, gathering his thoughts. "Honestly," he said finally, "it was a mix of curiosity and recklessness. I was young, arrogant, and convinced that nothing I did could have lasting consequences. It felt like an experiment, something I could forget about as soon as it was done." Jamie nodded, her gaze steady. "And now?" "Now," Christian said, meeting her eyes, "I see how wrong I was. I didn't just donate to a clinic. I helped create 4 incredible lives, and I'll never take that lightly again." Jamie's expression softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly see the man Christian had become, not the one he had been. The turning point. As the weeks went on, Christian's presence in Jamie's and the children's lives became a constant. He wasn't just a visitor or a fleeting figure, he was family. He attended school events, helped with chores, and even learned how to cook Jamie's favorite dish, much to her amusement. Slowly but surely, the walls Jamie had built around herself began to crumble. The children, too, began to trust him in ways that felt monumental. Thomas, the most skeptical of the 4, started seeking Christian's advice on school projects and even asked him to join a father-son event at school. Clara began sharing her drawings with him, her quiet confidence growing with each compliment he gave. Lucas, of course, delighted in dragging Christian into his pranks, while Mia's unwavering faith in him became a source of strength he hadn't known he needed. One evening, as they all sat around the dinner table, the conversation turned to Christmas. The children were buzzing with excitement, listing off their hopes for the holiday. "We always decorate the tree together," Maya said, her eyes shining. "Will you help us this year?" Christian glanced at Jamie, who gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I'd love to," he said, smiling, "but only if I get to hang the star on top." The children cheered, and Jamie couldn't help but smile. For the first time in years, the prospect of the holidays felt less like a burden and more like a celebration. A new chapter. Christmas came and went in a flurry of joy and chaos. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of cookies baking, and the sound of carols playing on the radio. Christian found himself swept up in the magic of it all, marveling at how this family, his family, had transformed his world. On Christmas Eve, as the children slept and the house grew quiet, Jamie and Christian found themselves alone by the tree. The lights cast a warm glow over the room, and for a moment they simply sat in silence, basking in the peace of the moment. "I never thought we'd get here," Jamie said finally, her voice soft. Christian turned to her, his expression serious. "Neither did I, but I'm glad we did." Jamie smiled, and this time it wasn't guarded or tentative. It was real. "Me too," she said. "The beginning of forever." The new year brought new challenges, but Christian faced them with a sense of purpose he had never known before. He balanced his responsibilities at work with his commitment to his family, finding a rhythm that felt both chaotic and fulfilling. Jamie, who had spent so long building a life on her own, began to let him in more and more. They weren't just co-parents or friends. They were partners, building something together that was stronger than either of them could have imagined. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. The children grew, their trust in Christian deepening with each passing day. Jamie, too, found herself believing in him in ways she hadn't thought possible. And Christian, for the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing success or running from his past. He was exactly where he wanted to be, with the people who mattered most. The man who had once walked through life with a heart of stone had found his home in the laughter of children, the warmth of love, and the promise of a future he never knew he wanted. This was the life he had been searching for all along, and he wasn't going to let it go.